We are in our fourth session, or fourth time together, as we've been looking at Joseph in the Old Testament book of Genesis. This week we're going to move into the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 through 10. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. Pharaoh was the most powerful person in the known world at that time. And yet, he was afraid of a group of immigrants. The Israelites were immigrants. They were living in a foreign land as a foreign people. And Pharaoh, did you hear that? Pharaoh was terrified of the Israelites. You see, fear. Fear can cause us to do strange and peculiar things. It can cause us to act in ways that are irrational, in ways that just don't make sense. Pharaoh should not have been afraid of the Israelites, yet he was. And that fear leads him to do things that are just irrational, that don't make sense. He orders all the midwives to take all the boys when they're born and to have them put to death. Fear, my friends, can lead us to do things that are irrational, that just don't make sense. Has there ever been a time in your life when fear controlled you, fear overtook you, and you did things that later you look back and said, what was I doing? What was I thinking? That's our first question for you to discuss as a group. Has fear ever overtaken you and caused you to do something that later you look back and went, what was I thinking? Question number 2. What is it that you fear now? At this point in your life, what are your biggest fears? I have 2 little girls, and of course I fear for their future. I fear for what's best for them. But what do you fear right now at this point in your life? That perfect love casts out all fear. You see, God wants to help us overcome our fears. What is it that you need to bring to God? God is there for us. How can you bring those things that you're afraid of to God, who wants to take them from you? Will you do that? Will you do that this week? Will you take those things that you're afraid of and bring them to God, who wants to help you with this? Or will you continue to hold on to them, pushing everyone else aside and saying, I've got it. I can handle it. I don't need help. I want to thank you for the last 4 sessions spending together as we looked at the person of Joseph, as we looked at hate and humility, forgiveness and fear. I hope that you walk away from this time that we've spent together learning more not only about Joseph, but about yourself and how God wants the best for you. A life that is lived not in hate, but a life that's lived in love, and a life not lived in arrogance, but a life lived in humility. A life that isn't lived in revenge or holding on to revenge, but a life that's lived in forgiveness. And then finally, a life that is truly to the fullest, a life that is lived without fear, lived in love, one that God wants each of us to have.
This video was created by First Connect, a ministry of First Congregational Church of Hudson. It was produced at the studios of Hudson Community Television. All rights reserved.